welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode number 40, where we're talking about a game that features more wigs than any game I've ever played, Lisboa from Eagle Gryphon Games. Carter, it's just wigs all the way down.
Wigs, wigs, wigs.
Wigs, wigs, wigs. We'll get more into that game in just a little bit, but we're going to start like we always do by talking about the news. And the news this week comes to us from tablefor1.me. This is the website from Frederick Schultz, who we've mentioned on here before, who's helped us to aggregate the news for this podcast. He has a great website, again, tablefor1.me, that you should check out. And many thanks to him for aggregating that for us. Our first bit of news this week is that Kanban EV has finally shown us a picture of its cover. Now, this is the reworking of Kanban, the game about building vehicles from Vita Lacerda, that was originally published by Stronghold Games, who made it look ugly and kind of janky.
And this does not look that way.
No, it features the Ian O'Toole art that we've all come to love and expect from Vita Lacerda's games. It's going to get that nice, beautiful Eagle Gryphon production, and it's going to come with a solo mode, which Kanban did not originally. So this is coming to Kickstarter in February 2020, and it just looks, it looks sexy.
Yeah, right. We only have the box art, right, so far?
Yeah, just the box art so far, but just one glance at it and you know that Stronghold doesn't hold the rights to this game anymore, because the game looks good.
Yeah, it's a very clean design versus the, I guess, more kind of cartoony design of the first one.
Yeah, cartoony is a really nice way to say it. I think that it's, the first version didn't look terrible. It's just super busy. And we need Ian O'Toole to bring his magic to bear on that board, I think. So if you're interested in that, check it out, coming to Kickstarter in February 2020. Our second bit of news for this week is that the Isofarian Guard, or Isofarian Guard, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, is coming from Skybound Games. This is an interesting looking game in that it's kind of a narrative-driven role-playing style game where you are going to be playing a member of this guard in a frozen nation sandwiched between two other big world powers, and you're trying to keep the borders of your country safe. And it looks pretty cool. For a game about basically being fantasy border patrol, it does look pretty interesting. It has an app that handles the narrative part with voice actors and sound effects and all that. And a bag building mechanic instead of dice.
Bag building mechanics are always fun.
Yeah, they are pretty fun. It definitely stands apart from the rest of the crowd for those reasons, and I would say probably because it's a 1 to 2 player game, which you don't see many of at all. It's getting lots of really positive buzz around it after being previewed at the summer cons, and yeah, people are really interested in this. It's coming to Kickstarter very soon. It'll be going up September 10th on Kickstarter, so if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. The preview page is up now. You can find that on Skybound Games' Facebook page. And finally, our last bit of news this week is one that is just so bizarre. Hasbro, the giant toy company, has purchased a company called Entertainment One, which owns many different properties, like Peppa Pig among them. But they also own Death Row Records, which means that Hasbro now owns Death Row Records with Tupac and Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and they were the bastion of West Coast rap for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting purchase?
Right.
A $4 billion purchase. And again, they probably didn't purchase it to get Death Row Records.
Right.
But that's how the headlines went the next day. A family-friendly company buys Death Row. So here's hoping that we see a Mousetrap-style game that features Death Row artists and their hits, and I can't really even imagine what this looks like, but I want a Death Row reskin of Mousetrap, assuming that they made Mousetrap. I don't know if they really did.
Yeah, I can't remember who made Mousetrap. I just remember anytime I got a hold of that game, some of the parts were missing.
Yeah, that's true. I think that was true for everybody. Yeah, I have no idea if Hasbro really made it. It's just that when I think of big junky, big box store games, I always assume they're Hasbro games. Yeah, and now they own Tupac, so there's that.
Good.
All right, and that's the last bit of news for this week. If we learn any more about Death Row Records and this deal, we'll be sure to let you know. But in the meantime, just rest easy knowing that Hasbro paid $4 billion for that. And that's all we've got for you with the news this week, so we're just going to go right into our review which is for Lisboa from Eagle Griffin Games. Lisboa is a Vita Lacerda game, a big box Euro game from 2017 that plays 1 to 4 players. And if you're not familiar with Vita Lacerda or his games, they're always very steeped in theme, even though they are big, heavy Euros. And the theme for this one is a little bit different from some of his others. On November 1st, 1755, the city of Lisbon suffered an earthquake of an estimated magnitude of 8.5 to 9.0, followed by a tsunami, and then 3 days of fires. And so the city was almost completely destroyed. And so in the game Lisboa, players are going to take on the roles of nobles in the city who are using their influence to facilitate the reconstruction and business development of the new city in order to earn prestige, or the physical manifestation of social prestige, wigs.
Right.
Yeah, wigs are your points in the game, and they are your way of showing that you are high society, man.
Yeah, do you think the wigs represent how big and majestic your wig is, or just how many different ones that you can swap between?
I choose to believe it's a mixture of both.
Okay.
The more points you have in this game, the bigger overall your individual wigs are, and also the more of them you have.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And so that's the goal of the game. Be the person at the end with the most wigs. So we're just going to get right into it by talking about the components for this game. And this is my first Vita Lacerda game that I've played. It is my first big box Eagle Griffin game that I've owned. And the components are stunning.
They're so good.
Man, I don't remember playing a Euro game with components this beautiful. It has this great like recessed player board that have spots for little cubes so they don't get bumped around. It's got like cutouts at the top of the player board for where you put your cards that you're going to tuck under your board for your portfolio. It gives this impression of everything having its place. It's just beautiful to behold. Big chunky wooden pieces, and if you get the deluxe edition, which is what we have that we've played with, it comes with metal coins. It comes with these big, beautiful drawstring bags for some of the pieces, an insert, which I don't know how on earth you would play this game without a good insert.
No.
It's amazing. It's an amazing production.
Yeah, it all fits together really well in the box. Yeah, like you said, all the pieces, like the wooden tokens for your main player pieces, they're cool, interesting shapes for your officials, things like that. I don't know. It's all just really, really well done.
Yeah, even... this is a silly thing, but when you lift off the lid on this box, just the box itself has an incredible amount of heft. Mm-hmm. There's just something about the way it's wrapped, I guess, or how thick it is that just screams quality from the beginning. And then on top of all that, there's the Ian O'Toole artwork, which I love Ian O'Toole. I think his stuff is very clean and beautiful. And this one is a little bit different from some of his other designs because it's a historical game, and so it can't just be all clean lines, right? The board looks like Portuguese tile work. And like it has cracks in it and stuff. It gives it a really cool aesthetic. And then the pictures of the different nobles that are on the board, they look dated, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like the fine line art. I don't know if it's still technically a taglio, but it's kind of reminiscent of that style of prints being made from, I guess, a Renaissance or post-Renaissance time. It fits thematically so well. It's really cool. It's just so well done.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then on top of all that, too, there are little cues all over the board for everything from in-game scoring to what little bonuses you get on this part of the board, and just little reminders everywhere, which on the one hand is great because there are a fair amount of rules in this game and a lot of little things that you could miss, so it's nice to have that there. But the board's pretty busy.
It is a very busy board. It is thematic, and I think it reinforces that. But there is just so much on the board. It is very busy. You're not going to necessarily know where anything is at a glance, I guess you should say, especially with the little hints and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's just so big. It's such a giant board.
Yeah. And what's amazing is that in addition to it being a big giant board with all of these reminders on it, you still have to have player aids for this game that are extensive.
Yes, little menus.
Yeah, they like little flip book menus. I felt like I was at the Cheesecake Factory. It's a pretty impressive production. On top of all that, the cards are the heart of this game, and they are really nice linen finish quality cards that feel great to play with. And the artwork is, everything about it is just fantastic production wise.
Yeah.
except for how much table space it takes up and all that, because it's a monster.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on top of all of that, that kind of elegance of the production, I think carries over into the rules for the game as well, because there are a lot of rules here. It's very clearly a heavy Euro game. But the rule book is laid out very nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like the rules were... They were laid out in a way that made sense, that introduced all the things to you. Whenever I had to look up things, which was relatively often, I didn't feel like I was having to thumb through. I kind of knew the general area to start looking. It was easy to remember with that. There was lots of examples throughout the rule book of how to do the different things to just kind of clarify any little questions you had. And also just like historical information, kind of explaining why some of the design choices were made almost.
Yeah, and I thought that was really great because some of his other games, like he has the Gallerist, which is about running art galleries and that sort of thing, or building cars or making wine. Even if I don't really know about how to build a car, I can, use my context clues to figure out, generally thematically what's happening here. This is just a little bit removed from the kind of theme I would understand immediately like that. I didn't know anything about these natural disasters that befell Lisbon until I played this game.
Right.
And so it is a cool education in that way, but I wouldn't get all the different ways the theme is embedded in the mechanics if it weren't for those notes. And I think he knew that.
Yeah.
I love that, though. The thematic touches are just everywhere in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I assumed because these little buildings, these stores you're placing are all kind of like double wide, but there's one row that are the smaller, more narrow ones. And I assumed that there was some mechanical reason for that. There's not. He says in the notes that he did that because that's just what they look like in Lisbon. Yeah,
the map on the board is supposed to be downtown Lisbon. That's what it looks like, which is pretty amazing and impressive. I don't know. There's something about playing this design that just reinforces my belief that you can and should make thematic Euros. If you're going to make one, put a little effort into the theme because, folks, it can be done.
Absolutely.
Man, I just love everything about that. And the way the rules are laid out, I feel like for a heavy Euro game, I made it through them pretty quickly. And then, there's a ton of iconography in here. But the menus, even though I make fun of them, are useful.
Yes.
And pretty easy to navigate, all things considered, and came in very handy for me during my solo plays.
Yes, absolutely.
And that makes the play of the game surprisingly smooth for a game of this size. When I first heard about this, I think that Eagle Griffin was billing this, or maybe it was Vito Lacerda, as a fundamentally simple design. Because on your turn, all you're going to do is play a card and pick up a card.
Mm-hmm.
Which is technically true.
Right, technically.
But man, the amount of thought that goes into making that choice and all the implications of that choice are kind of amazing and a little bit scary.
Yeah, that is technically what you could do. But yeah, there's so much in how you play the cards, which card you choose to play. What actions you take with that, because, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah, there is a lot. And that means that explaining how this game plays there's no way we could begin to capture all of it. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about how the game plays, I think it's probably important that we stick to the major movements of it, I guess, like the major pieces of the game. And so you can't really talk about this without talking about the fact that it's a multi-use card game at its core. What you're going to be doing on your turn is you're going to have this hand of cards, and on them, they're going to have icons at the top and the bottom and a picture in the middle. And often the picture in the middle is a picture of one of the three primary nobles that you're going to be visiting over the course of the game to help you exert your influence over the city to get new shops open, new public buildings, start to revitalize the city by removing some of the rubble left over from these disasters. Most of the time, you're either on your turn going to be tucking a card at the top of your player board or the bottom, or you'll just be playing it at the top of the board. So when you use your cards to tuck them under your portfolio, you have access to like the 6 main actions that you're going to be using over the course of the game. And those are pretty standard things, right? Like going to build ships or going to produce more goods or build a building or something like that. Pretty standard stuff. But what's interesting about it is, in addition to letting you take that action, you're building up the power of your little noble influence, I guess. You're building your portfolio. So when you tuck those cards under your player board, you're giving yourself kind of a permanent bonus for the rest of the game. And that's a pretty interesting choice because you can't just put down as many of those as you'd like.
No, there's a strict limit, and you will definitely be wanting to increase that so you can put down more cards, increase your portfolio, and just exert more power.
But here's the trick to this game. You can't just increase it very easily. You want to increase that limit, but the only way you can do that is by clearing the rubble from the fire, the flooding, and the earthquake that exists in the city. Well, the only way you're going to clear rubble is if you're also going to build there, right? So you've got to have the money to go build a building, and as part of building, you're going to clear rubble. And then once you've cleared the rubble and cleared enough of it, then you can start to unlock more aspects of your portfolio. And that right there is what makes the game interesting to me. There is not one area of this game or one element of it that isn't interwoven with three others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It makes it very difficult to explain.
Yes.
But everything depends on everything else. So, it feels good to grow your portfolio. But really, all growing your portfolio lets you do is get more money, get more influence, or get like a little one-time bonus. So it feels good at the time, but it's not going to win you the game necessarily. Really, one of the main things you have to focus your attention on is actually building buildings in the city. So you want to build different shops, like bookshops or linen shops, or I don't remember what the different...
Like goldsmithing.
Renaissance era businesses.
Right.
And the more of those that you build, the more potential points you're going to score because you're revitalizing the city by putting out new business, and that's good. But also, the more you control the means of production.
Right.
And that's a pretty fascinating system that they have there because you can take an action to produce goods, and you'll produce goods based on the number of those shops that you own out in the city. But one of the coolest things in this game to me is that every time you produce, the value of the goods you produce drops. Because supply and demand, right?
Right.
There's more of that stuff out there now. And what's really also interesting is that at the beginning of the game, the values for these goods are as high as they're ever going to be.
Right. They only go down.
Yeah, because there's just been all these disasters. And so, of course, they're valued at much higher than they would be normally. That stuff's hard to get now. But once you start getting the city cranking again, suddenly those are going to be worth less and less. And there's some interesting tension there because you want to take some of these goods and use them to influence the nobles. You give them a few books or some linen, and they'll let you do what you need to do in the city.
Right.
Or you can load them up on ships and sell them. Get some money, because money is hard to come by, man.
Very tight.
It's so tight. And you can get wigs for selling that stuff. But you don't want to keep going back to that well too often to produce more, because suddenly you're going to have all these goods and not much to do with them because they're not really worth anything. It's a fascinating system.
Yeah, it's really cool because, like you said, I mean, you can spend those goods like basically as influence to give you extra actions in court, or you can get it for money, which you need money to clear, to build, stores to revitalize the city, which is very, very expensive. And yeah, it's a lot to do and have to worry about.
It is. And what's interesting too is that you're not just building these buildings based on what kind of products you want them to generate, but also based on where they are on the city grid, because you're going to get a huge amount of points or you could get a huge amount of points if you build them on the right street. Basically, in addition to building stores, you're going to be opening public buildings over the course of the game. And those public buildings will allow you to score, all the pink buildings in this row, or all the blue and pink buildings. And you want to position these public buildings in such a way that you have a lot of buildings on that row to score, and your opponent does not, which is a very interesting balance.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to convey how this grid of buildings and public buildings works, but it's not super straightforward. Well, I mean, I should say it's not hard to comprehend, but it has nuance to it and really gives you some interesting choices in how do you maximize your points and how do you not help your opponent.
Yes, and that becomes very difficult to do, especially when you're playing solo. We'll get into solo play in just a minute, but one more thing that I'd like to say is that on top of like figuring out how to score the most points from your buildings and your public buildings, you also want to be passing laws that kind of give you more prestige based on the things you've been doing for the city.
Mm-hmm.
So those are called decrees in the game. And decrees are basically just cards that you can draft over the course of the game that give you in-game bonus points. And, at the beginning of the game, you don't really have time to grab those, right? I mean, you want to because you want to start picking a direction for yourself over the course of the game to focus on getting yourself a lot of points based on these decree cards. But that's in-game stuff. It doesn't give you any bonus in the middle of the game. And so, there's no limit to the number of these things you can draft. But if you spend all of your time drafting them, you're not going to do the act that you need to do in order to actually get points out of those decree cards. And that is like a fascinating tension. You need them to win the game. You can get a ton of points off those cards. But it always feels like you don't have enough time to go back and actually grab one for yourself.
Right. It's not as quite of robust of an action as some of the other ones you can take. So you feel like you're taking a soft turn and to get points hopefully at the end.
Yeah, because a lot of these other actions will give you a short-term benefit and increase your production capability, or also give you points or something like that.
Right. Just like staking out limited resources, like how many spots there are to put down buildings or stores or things like that, or to build a ship before someone else does.
Yes, but none of those things pay off in the way that the decree cards do.
Right.
It's so interesting because what this game allows you to do is to grow the way that you want to, and to make you feel like you're really growing over the course of the game. Because your turn one compared to the last turn of the game is a huge difference, which feels great. But I wouldn't necessarily call it an engine building game.
Right. Some aspects of that, but it's more of just you are becoming more influential and powerful and can get more things done. It's not necessarily you have an economic engine and so you can take really expensive actions that you weren't used to. It's just, you're just more effective. Yes, and as you grow in effectiveness over the course of the game, then you can begin to channel that toward, a handful of particular directions to get the most out of the cards. So, like giving you the space to grow in that way, but also the flexibility to choose how you want to score at the end of the game is a really nice combination that works well for me. And there's a huge deck of decree cards. Oh yeah, it is very large. Man, it's kind of astounding how much replayability there is here just based on the number of cards in the game. Mm-hmm. You don't start with an asymmetric power or anything like that. You start with one small bonus that you get, which kind of helps determine your direction for the game. But really, the way you're going to specialize pretty quickly over the course of the game, and that's going to happen through the cards and through the decrees and through 100 other little avenues that you'll be presented with over the course of the game. And I don't know, I would call this on the one hand a sandbox game, but also it's pretty tight and focused by the end. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just, it grows and changes in a different way than what I've experienced in other games. The other thing that makes this interesting too is that in a typical engine building game, you just get more and more powerful, and then also your options become more expensive. In this game, thematically, this is appropriate, I think, but you are becoming more powerful and effective over the course of the game, but also things are getting somewhat easier. You're clearing the rubble out of the way, and the city's starting to get cleaned up and that sort of thing. That means you don't have to pay as much to build buildings as you do at the beginning of the game. Of course, it would cost a lot to dig out all the flood damage and fire damage before you could actually build a building. That makes perfect sense, but it does create a different feel than what I'm used to. Yeah. I guess, I don't know if this might just be like an illusion in my mind, but I feel like it's just the board state becomes more powerful in general, kind of for everybody versus, you are becoming more powerful yourself, but it all kind of just like goes together. Yeah. It all comes together in a way that makes me feel good as a player when I'm playing this game. Yes.
And it makes me feel smart, and it gives you opportunities to time things well so that you can grab a particular area before somebody else does, or really capitalize on the portfolio that you have right now to make a really good, smart decision. Or you can see sometimes 3 or 4 turns come to a head in a way that is perfect and satisfying. All of that feels so good. And what's really great about this is it's preserved in the solo game. I've not actually played this multiplayer. There are things about it that would be a little bit different. And the competition for space in the city itself would be a little more fierce, I think.
Yeah.
You have the ability to sell your goods on other people's ships in the multiplayer game. So you go ahead and get the money for those, but they get the points for you selling goods on their ship. Things like that would be interesting, and I would really like to play this multiplayer at some point. But the solo experience is very compelling because those are the only things that seem like they would feel pretty different from the solo experience.
Right. Yeah. I also have not played it multiplayer yet, but I mean, the impression I would get is that you would have a sense of, oh, this player is kind of adopting this strategy, and you can kind of start to see that unfold. Where the AI for the solo play, there is no strategy. It's just doing the things it does, and you can kind of see it coming in a way that maybe mimics like a strategy, but it's not. I mean, there's no overall strategy. It's just doing things in a way that you can kind of weigh the probability of how things are going to play out, things like that.
Yeah, and I really love that because, I mean, yes, it doesn't have an overall strategy, but I think that lowers the overhead of this somewhat because the solo mode is relatively streamlined. Every turn, you have these 4 card piles that you can draw from over the course of the game, and there are 3 nobles. And on the AI player's turn, you're going to move their marker from one noble to the next, and you're going to move their marker on the card piles from position 1 to position 2, 3, 4, and then loop back to 1. That's interesting because you can see what they're going to do next. Mm-hmm. You can look at the board at any time and see what they're going to do next, but the nature of Lisboa is such that it's hard to think through all the implications of exactly what that move's going to do for you or to you. But if you want to sit there and puzzle through all that, you can. Often, though, you don't really need to. So, for instance, you can see next turn, they're going to build a public building, and that's going to choose which buildings can score on one of these, the downtown grid. And you want to get to that public building before they do, because there's one out there that would work really well for you, and they're probably not going to put it in a place that would help you. And there's just enough of a peek into what's coming that if you want to sit there and puzzle through all of it, you can, but you don't really need to make smart and informed decisions.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because there was definitely times I would slow down and be like, okay, how is this going to play out so I can know what I need to do and things like that. But I feel like a lot of the times there's plenty of turns where that's not really, I guess, even really beneficial probably. And I feel like there's enough interesting kind of like tactical choices, because you obviously have a strategy for playing the game, but there's enough kind of things changing and evolving to where like, okay, this is what I'm going towards overall, but this is the best choice right now. And I think because you're kind of waiting to see how that stuff works out, it takes that strain or maybe need to really math out everything that's going to happen, because you can just kind of wait to see what things look like and just do what's the best choice for you.
Exactly. And you can influence their position and board state some. So they're always going to move, to the next noble spot, and then they're going to take one of the actions associated with that noble, either the top or the bottom one, depending on where they are on the card track. So all of that's coming. But when they move into that noble space, they still have to pay influence to go and visit the noble, just like you do. Well, you can structure the board in such a way that you clog up the board with your courtesans or whatever they are to make it expensive for them to go there and take the action. And that feels really good, because over the course of the game, if you can deplete their influence, you can get them to the point where they're losing points for that, or at least not screaming up the track. And that feels good because there aren't that many solo games where you really get to take moves that put them in a bind, at least in a Euro game. The AI player isn't often that affected by whatever you do or don't do on your turn. They just take things that block spaces and then generate points arbitrarily. Mm-hmm. For the most part, this thing follows the same rules that you do.
Yeah.
And so that means you can block them in the way that you would block a human player.
Right. I mean, it's still going to kind of arbitrarily collect things that just score set amounts of points. But yeah, absolutely. Like, you are kind of affecting it in the same way. You can try to set things up to take away points and play that smart.
I found myself often trying to judge my best move among 3 or 4 different options and then taking the one that benefited me and hurt the AI.
Mm-hmm.
That feels really good in a solo game.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels even better because I don't have to spend that much time on the AI's turn trying to figure out what they're going to do next. It's pretty obvious what they're going to do. It's not always immediately obvious exactly how to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for instance, when you put down a public building for the AI, you have to go through the math figuring out which one is going to give the AI the most points. And that takes a little getting used to.
It takes a little getting used to, because it's one of those things that, like, you want to be fair, in the sense of, like, that you're actually making sure that, yes, this is absolutely the way it would make the most points. Okay, I need to look between these 2 spaces. Does it make a difference? Okay, no, this one doesn't, and so you're kind of having to go through this. And yeah, I would say it definitely takes a while to do, and it is relatively cumbersome. But for myself, I think when I'm playing a game of this weight, this heavy, that I'm okay with it, because like you said, it's easy to manage the AI relative for the kind of game you're playing. This isn't something I would want to do in a game that was like medium weight, probably.
No, I don't think so. It's a good fit for a heavy game.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still doing more on my turn than I'm doing on the AI's turn.
Right. It's not, given everything that's happened, it's not overbearing. I'm spending most of my time just thinking about what I want to do. And like everything, and even games that, like, I know I've complained about in the past that have like more of an AI load that you're having to figure out. Yeah, I don't know. It just, relative for this, it definitely works. If I'm going to play this game, I'm ready to take on that mental load in general, because that's what I'm doing. And it is very appropriate for the kind of game it is.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think overall, I was really impressed with what they were able to accomplish with this, given that it doesn't have an elaborate AI system. It doesn't have the sideboard like you have in Anachrony with all these different options for what the AI might do on its turn and smart ways of collecting stuff. It still feels smart, but the rule set's pretty short.
For the solo rules?
For the solo rules. Mm-hmm. But I found the solo AI to be very competitive.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but not unbeatable. What's interesting to me is I've played this game several times, and my first couple of games I got pretty smashed by the AI. I got better, and then was able to at least challenge them, and then did eventually beat them, but I never reached a point where it's like, okay, I'm going to sit down and play Lisboa tonight, and I played it enough times that I know I'm going to win. It's just a matter of by how much. I guess it's possible that some people would get to that point, but it doesn't feel that way to me.
Yeah.
There's enough variable there that I think it feels fresh every time.
Yeah, it varies enough every time you play it. I don't know, it's just interesting and fun to do, to see like how the board state is changing and reacting to it and just doing all the things. It just feels good and fun.
It does. I found myself sitting here, for an hour and a half is about what it takes me to play this game, absorbed in the experience. The theme here is very strong. It's not the kind that would typically draw me in, but I did feel more connection to the theme than I expected here. And the mechanics together with that, how well they meshed, just that combination sucked me in while I was playing the game.
Yeah, it was hard to stop once I started. Absolutely. And not all games that we review do that.
Definitely not. I was really pleasantly surprised by this. I've been intimidated by Vital Lacerda for a long time because he's sort of the heavy Eurogamers designer. And it's not like I feel like I couldn't play them. I just figured I might not enjoy it. I have been surprised by the amount of elegance in this design. The commitment to theme is really impressive. And it's not like there are brand new mechanics in here, but I've never played a game that feels like this.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, there's nothing like, oh, this is a really clever mechanic or anything like that. But yeah, it feels different than other games I've played, like thematically and also just in the way everything connects together.
And if you were trying to describe the game, you couldn't just say this is a worker placement game or this is a hand management game. I mean, I would say at its core, it's a multi-use card game.
Yeah.
But that feels like it's selling it short.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially the core of it, but not you don't feel like that's the main choice you're making. It's a lot of things that you're managing.
Yeah, because just calling it a multi-use card game, I feel like doesn't do justice to the area control aspect of controlling downtown or how interesting the economy is.
Right. Just managing the market, sending things on ships, how much cargo capacity they are, the influencing the court. There's just a lot of things.
There is. And it all comes together in a really incredibly compelling package for me. This game makes me want to play more Vito Lacerda games.
Absolutely.
I have a copy of the Gallerist now, so that will be the next one that I try and that we will probably review on the show at some point because it's supposed to have a good solo mode. I'm very interested in Vinhos because it's about winemaking, and that's been a love of mine, really, and of yours for quite some time. So, and the fact that I can identify his games by their theme very easily, and that all the themes are so different, that's compelling for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just to wrap up our review of this particular game, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly for this the way we typically do. For me, there's so much good here. Starting with the look and feel of the game. Component-wise, amazing.
Yeah, it feels good to use the things. I don't know what else to say. Everything's nice to look at. Even if the board is kind of busy, it just reinforces that time period, late 18th century. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's expensive. Eagle Griffin games are pricey, but it feels worth it to me also. Great production here. The solo rule set is great. This is one of my favorite things about this game, is how relatively easy it is to manage the solo AI, and yet I get a very competitive and interesting experience out of it every time I play.
Absolutely.
Also, the interconnectedness of the mechanics, the different elements of the game, how everything depends on everything else. That is, for me, hugely important and one of my favorite things about this game. Yes, it's a game where you play a card, but the implications of that card are pretty far-reaching. Also, the growth that you experience over the course of the game. My first turn and my last turn are very different. And if they're not in this kind of game, I'm not interested in it. This has that in spades, I would say, without being pigeonholed as an engine builder.
Yeah.
And it's surprisingly replayable. For a game that doesn't have asymmetric powers or anything, there are just so many variable elements in this game. Really, almost everything about the setup can be changed. It's going to feel fresh and different.
Yeah, I would say so. It's like the things that switch around and change around are the right things to do that too, and they change enough each time. Yeah,
I think so. And then the theme.
Yeah.
The theme grabs me. It's interesting. I learned something new here. And yeah, it's just, I didn't expect to like a game about the 1700s in Portugal.
Right.
If you told me any other designer was doing it, I'd be like, no thanks.
Right. And I feel like even just, you can describe it in a way that makes it sound really generic too. Just like, oh yeah, you're going to try to influence the lead builder or architect or buy plans or get favors from the king. It's like, oh, cool. But just the way it all plays out mechanically is so good. And just this idea of managing the disaster and rebuilding the city and the economic activity of that and prices going down. I don't know. It all fits really, really well.
Yeah, I like that Lacerda seems to anticipate that some people will try to describe that game that way, and he is at pains all throughout the rulebook to say, hey, actually, this is how this ties into the theme. And, the way that your board looks where you store the rubble cubes, it looks that way because people would fill the walls with rubble, and that's how they reinforce their walls. It's just, I really love all of that. There are 100 other things I could say here that are good for me, but those are the main things, I think.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would say is maybe a little bit bad is just that it has a steep learning curve. It's not unbearable, but there's definitely a lot to keep in mind at once in the game, or understanding the connections between the different elements of the game is harder than learning the rules themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, there's just, on my first playthrough, there were like a couple of rules that would have made a pretty significant difference that I just forgot about. I understood them when I read them, but there's a lot to take in. And yeah, it's just easy to forget those things or to look over them. And yeah, it's a heavy game, but I don't know what else to say about it other than that. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those are the only things I would consider maybe negative, though. There's definitely nothing ugly about this game for me.
Yeah, not for me either.
This is one of the most impressive Euro games I've played in a long time.
Yeah, there's not as many games as I want to play in this like kind of heavier category, but this is definitely one that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, I love this game, and that's why we are going to give this the stamp of approval, which is, again, an award we don't give out to very many games, but this is really something special, but whether you play it multiplayer or solo. But I would say you could get this game and only ever play it solo, and you'll have a very rich and rewarding experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me want to play it again. It's a game that I like. After I play it, I think about what I could have done differently, or just those choices. Like a lot of good choices to make, but I never feel like I get bogged down on my turn trying to make it. I don't know, it has a lot of things that are balanced well for me that just makes it just feel awesome to play.
Yeah, and so that's our review. This game's getting the stamp of approval, and that wraps up this episode. If you haven't heard yet, we are a member of the Dice Tower Network, and that means that you can go on to the dicetower.com and find a bunch of other shows that are similar to ours that might be a good fit for you to learn a little bit more about board games and the people who play them. So go on to dicetower.com if you want to find other shows in the network. We have a Facebook and Instagram account that we update probably not as often as we should, because neither of us really like social media all that much. But if you want to see pictures of what we're playing and what we're doing, go on there and you can follow us on there. We also host giveaways from time to time, and that's where you'll find out about them. So go and follow us on Facebook, on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. You can also go on to iTunes and rate or review the show. A lot of people have done that for us, and we really appreciate it. It really helps to raise the visibility of the show, and people are looking for podcasts. So if you've not done that yet, please go online and rate or review us on iTunes. And every time we do one of these episodes, I let people know we have a micro badge on Board Game Geek, and you can get a copy for yourself. Normally, micro badges cost 8 Geek Gold, and Geek Gold is like surprisingly hard to come by on BGG. We've got a bunch of it, so if you want some, just send me a message, and I'd be more than happy to spot you the Geek Gold that you need to get one for yourself so you can show other people how much you enjoy the show. And that's all we've got for this episode, folks. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
And I'm Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.